Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is TNC in Massachusetts webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, influencers, and our partners from New England and around the world. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Deb Markowitz, the State Director of TNC in Massachusetts, and today I'll be your host. Here at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, we're dedicated to creating a healthier world for all. We work locally and also globally using innovative science and scalable, long-lasting solutions to tackle the most complex environmental challenges facing our warming planet. We know that what we do here in Massachusetts to protect nature will mean a better future for people and for the planet. We have an exciting program for you today. We're going to be getting an update on our efforts to restore the endangered bog turtle population in Western Massachusetts. Angela Sirois-Pitel, she's our stewardship manager for TNC in Massachusetts, and Julia Vineyard, a graduate research assistant at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, will give us an exclusive update on how the bog turtles are doing and the results from their tracking this past summer. But before we dive into today's program, I wanted to share a little bit more about our guests. So Angela is a stewardship manager for the Conservancy, and she's focused on the lands in Western Massachusetts. She monitors conservation easements and preserves. She manages rare species like this turtle and their habitats, and she creates and maintains trails and preserve infrastructure. So, you think of it as just open land, but there's a lot of work that we do to make sure that we're stewarding it for the betterment of people and nature. Angela received her bachelor's degree at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire and a master's at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse, New York. And interestingly, and maybe not by chance, her master's thesis focused on the conservation success of the bog turtle in Massachusetts. So you're going to hear from her about the longevity of her interest and work in Massachusetts with this turtle. Julia Vineyard is a graduate research assistant at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. She's a former AmeriCorps member and helped advance TNC's bog turtle research during her service with the Massachusetts chapter. She's got a bachelor's degree in biology from Maryville College. So as you think of questions for Angela and Julia, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I think now we can just dive in. Thank you so much for joining us, Angela and Julia.
Yeah, thank you, Deb, so much for the introductions and for getting us started today. So as Deb mentioned, I've been with the project for a long time. I started off as a bright-eyed, enthusiastic intern and got to join some bog turtle tracking events. And despite the mud and bugs and poisonous plants, I pretty much instantly fell in love with the conservation for this species. And throughout the last 15 years, I've had a really incredible journey working on this project and getting to work alongside so many other dedicated conservationists, many of whom have been female mentors to me. And so I was really excited to bring Julia on to this next phase of the project and that she was able to join us today to talk about her research and how we're doing to preserve the bog turtle. So to get us started, Liz, can you proceed? I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction to the bog turtle. And so this is a terrestrial turtle, and it spends its entire lifetime within the wetlands. And the adult turtles are, about smaller than the size of your average cell phone and less weight than the standard baseball, so pretty small for adults. And they have a domed ebony colored shell, and they are most easily recognized by the neck patches, which are a yellow to orange color. And some populations have these really magnificent starburst patterns that are common on the shell of the turtle. So that's the turtle you see there is one from a population in eastern New York. We can often tell the difference between males and females by the belly or the plastron of the animal. So the bottom left picture shows you how the male shell is a little bit concave, whereas the female shells is a lot smoother and flatter on the bottom. So we can go to next slide. So the population of the bog turtle, the range of the species is along the eastern coast of North America. it is in two disjunct populations. You have a northern population and a southern population. In 1997, the species was listed as federally threatened. The northern population was primarily listed, but then they subsequently also listed the southern population because they look, pretty much exactly alike. You can't tell them apart if you have a southern bog turtle or a northern bog turtle. And they didn't think that the southern population was as threatened, but it's still facing some declines and needed protection. So in the last 20th century, it's estimated that the population has experienced about a 90% decline, which obviously led to the listing of the species. So most of this decline has happened because of habitat loss, actual conversion and destruction of the wetlands that these bog turtles live in, from human development, incompatible agricultural practices that would ditch and drain and convert these wetlands into pasture and no longer be suitable for bog turtles. And then the species also exhibited a lot of pressure from collection for the pet trade. So these are small, cute turtles that people wanted as pets. And so, people going in and collecting them did have a direct threat on the species. Now, the listing of the species under the Endangered Species Act did provide a lot of protection and halting a lot of these issues, but we have still considered to have pressure and threats to the species despite its protection. So what we're seeing is that the places that the turtles live, the wetlands, are still threatened by encroachment of things like invasive plants, conversion of the habitat, or changes to hydrology, culverts and flooding and road, issues that are still impacting the wetlands. Despite them being protected, they can still have negative impacts. And so, one of the primary things that, conservation is focused on now is identifying, protecting, and restoring the places where bog turtles still exist. Next slide. So a little bit of background on like the wetlands where they live. So these are small, isolated, spring-fed wetlands. They're often, like, the technical term for these are called calcareous wetlands or wet meadows. So they have a lot of kind of micro topography and diversity of the plants. So you'll get a lot of different kinds of plants living there, and the calcareous nature of the wetlands that we have in our area. You have a lot of unique plants that are found here and nowhere else. And the microtopography is kind of about the texture of the wetland. So you get these low depressions where the water will move through these little rivulets. These tend to be little bog turtle highways where they can move really easily. Being a terrestrial animal, they're not really found in, they're not found in ponds or streams or things like that. They like this in-between area where you get a lot of dry ground and the moist soils as well. And so, I have two pictures here, one of like a more open traditional bog turtle wetland where the turtles might spend their summer months foraging, basking, hanging out. And then you have a more forested condition so that the turtles will then return to the shrubs and forested wetlands where they'll spend the winter time in features that are called hibernacula. So these are little tunnels down into these spring-fed moist and wet areas in the wetland. So the bog turtles will essentially kind of nestle down in there. It's super cold, but it stays at constant temperature. And because it's spring-fed, they have a lot of oxygen in the water there. And so that's how they persist down through the winter in these wetlands. They never have to leave the wetlands. They nest here and overwinter here. And so, fortunately, the bog turtles don't have to make that precarious, like, annual movement that a lot of our other native turtles do, like out of the wetlands to nest and have to cross roads. Luckily, the bog turtles can find everything they need right here in these wetlands. And so the picture on the top right shows you the forested habitat, and that's actually a picture of a hibernacula. And you can see the hummocks and the mounded vegetation that's created from like the sphagnum mosses. And if you look closely, you might be able to see the turtle that's basking right at the center of the photo, right at the entrance of a tunnel to a hibernacula. So these features, this like micro topography of the system, the turtles are allowed to climb up and kind of get a nice basking spot, despite this is a early spring photo. So later in the season, the vegetation is going to be a lot taller, but it just adds some unique diversity and complexity to the systems. Next slide. So, being at the northern range of the species and here in Massachusetts, the bog turtle was never probably widely abundant. But, despite the wetlands that they live in being globally rare, we do have quite a few of them here at the base of the Appalachian Mountains as it runs through Western Massachusetts. So for the last 30 years, the Nature Conservancy and state agencies have been searching for bog turtle sites and hoping to find many of them. But, in the 1980s, 3 populations were discovered, but today we only have 2 extant populations, meaning that there's just turtles living in 2 of these places. And fortunately, we were able to act quickly and protect these places. They are under permanent protection with the Nature Conservancy and the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. Oh, we lost our slide.
I'm just starting to queue up the video, Angela.
Oh, okay, not a problem. So, so these sites are permanently protected, and because we've been working there since the 80s, the TNC has worked closely with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Bronx Zoo, Natural Heritage, to do a lot of in-depth research and studies. So we've had PhD studies, master's research, not just on the bog turtle, but also on the vegetation and the hydrology. And we've even studied the pollen cores here to understand what the habitat looked like in the pre-colonial time, so that we would have some reference of like what we were trying to manage back to. So the Nature Conservancy has always taken a very informed approach to the management of these sites, and all of the actions we do are very driven on research that's either been done in our sites or been informed by others. And so Julia is going to talk to us about her part of the research and her phase of the research and what she's been working on. But before we do that, we're going to jump in and show you, take you right into the field with us and give you a glimpse of in closer detail of what this project's been all about.
Can everybody see that? Can
Yes,
you
I can see
Oh,
it.
okay. It's overlapping on the PowerPoint for me. Great.
Nope. There you go.
I've always loved wildlife, and I've always dreamed of a job that I could care for wildlife in a way that had a meaningful impact. Bog turtles are one of the smallest terrestrial turtles in North America. They are a federally threatened species, meaning they do get protection under the Endangered Species Act. Less than about 150 turtles probably exist in Massachusetts. There's only 2 known populations left, but then nationally they're very rare as well.
Bog turtles are endangered for a number of reasons, primarily just habitat loss. So as people move in and as invasive species move in and change the hydrology and water quality, it messes with the habitat availability that they have. So take away the places that they can live and their populations are going to decrease.
You're not allowed to have them as a pet because they are a federally threatened species, but they definitely have a threat in terms of poaching for the pet trade. And because of that, we keep the locations of our sites very secret.
You got her over there?
Yeah, she's over here. And so there is a federal recovery plan to try to bring them out of that threatened status. And so we work closely with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well as our state agency partners to make sure that we're doing our part to protect the species, not just in Massachusetts, but range-wide throughout the country. What we have going on right now is marker capture studies to be able to find as many turtles as possible each spring. Oh, I got another one. And that data will be entered into a statistical model that will give us an estimate of the adult population size. And then we're also using radio transmitters that are affixed onto the shell of the turtle. And we've been tracking several animals' movements weekly for the last 3 years.
135 because of the rain, so you got pushed way downstream.
And that's going to give us information about kind of where the turtles like to hang out, and are we making the right habitat conditions for them? Are we creating new areas and they like those areas and they're going into those areas and exploring them? I would say 108.
If we can find that the turtles are using more areas that we have restored, and if we can find that there are more turtles than we originally thought, that would be a great success for the species.
And especially in Massachusetts, it's been a really amazing legacy of a lot of dedicated women and scientists that have, made this project happen out here. And so my hope is that we continue that, generation on, and that the organizations can sustain that work, and the bog turtles will need less and less help over time because the population will be stable enough.
All right, as Liz gets the PowerPoint back up, perfect. As you were able, excuse me, to see in the video, to locate bog turtles, we're walking through the wetland and using a variety of different methods, including visual surveys, radio telemetry, and even trapping. So we go out and walk around the wetland to search for bog turtles, and since they're so small, we usually can't see them. So we have to listen in for them moving, and Angela is great at finding turtles by ear. It's a new survey method she's coined. And then we move around the vegetation to look for them, as you can see in the top photos there. At the 2 known sites that Angela described earlier, we have 10 turtles on radios. These radios allow us to locate the turtles using a receiver and antenna, as you saw in the video, the big silver thing I was waving around. And then the final method that we use is trapping. So this uses passive interruption traps that aren't baited and cause no harm to the turtles. These traps are simply wire mesh boxes. They're about the same length as from your fingertips to your elbow. And the turtles walk into the trap, and the trap doors fall behind the turtle, and the turtle can't get out. And we check these traps every 24 hours and cover them with vegetation to provide shade for the turtles so they're most comfortable. Anytime that we find a turtle, we have to figure out which turtle it is first off. So we have a notching code that where each segment of the shell, called scutes, is given a number. So to figure out what turtle ID it is, we add up all the numbers for the segments, and then that starts number. So once we find a turtle and we figure out who it is, we mark its location with the GPS, check it over to make sure it's healthy, and then take note of what the turtle was doing. Next slide, please. So with all this information that I'm collecting, what am I trying to answer? So these 3 questions are the primary questions of my research. So first, we want to know what the 2 known populations are currently doing, how their status is, how their sex ratios, survival probabilities, all this population demographics. And then second, as Angela explained earlier, bog turtles need open canopy wetlands for basking, and the sites that the turtles are known to be at are being managed for that. So I want to see if there are any responses of the turtles to the habitat management that has happened, if they're using the areas that have been previously restored and they weren't using those areas before. And then the third question is, while we know that there are 2 populations in the state, there's no reason to think that there can't be more. So I'm hoping to find more populations. Next slide, please. So I've already completed 1 season of field work along with Angela and other TNC staff members, and it was a great success. So we have 20 turtles on radio at the sites and have had a total of over 1,030 observations of over 90 different turtles. So that's a lot of turtles throughout the year. We've had 50 or more than 50 at site number 1 and more than 40 at site number 2. And at each of these sites, we've had over 20 females, which is crucial for the reproductive success of the species. The oldest turtles we found at site number 1, it was a female that is at least in her mid to late 40s. She was found as an adult back in 1985 when these studies first began. And this turtle has been part of both of the previous studies and is part of mine. Site number 2's oldest turtle is a male that was found in the 1990s as an adult. And when he was found, he was estimated to be pretty old then. So we're estimating now that he's in his mid to late 40s as well. And this turtle was part of the 1990 study and is part of my study as well. So overall, we find a lot of turtles that were found originally in the 1980s populations. So it's not always the easiest to figure out which are the oldest turtles, but by estimation, those are the 2 that we have. Next slide. So perhaps most exciting is finding new turtles that have never been found before. So by finding new turtles, we can know that the populations are continuing to reproduce and possibly even grow. So we found 14 new turtles in 2021, half of which are adults. So as you can see, these turtles are very small, and the juveniles in the right-hand photo there, they're incredibly hard to find. So it's not surprising that they can go undetected for a long time and are only first seen when they are fully grown. So finding new adults is important because it means that there is recruitment in the adult age class, which is crucial for the success of the populations. This species depends on adults living and continuing to reproduce for a long time. And it's always great when we can find juveniles because it adds valuable information to the understanding of the populations. We're able to track them for a longer period of time and gather information about survival and growth, but we still don't know about their habitat use because they're too small to put those radios onto them. And so our data collection on the juveniles is sporadic and incidental, just whenever we happen to stumble across them. Next slide, please. So to continue into 2022, I'll keep tracking and trapping turtles. So we still have 20 turtles on radio at the sites, and then going out and trapping at those sites to collect turtles that aren't on radio. And this will give us distribution and population data. And one of the things I'm most excited about is to find possible new sites for the bog turtle in the state. So I'm going to be working with GIS data to identify where land could possibly be good for bog turtle habitat. And then once I've found those areas, I'm going to work with the landowners to get permission to access the land and do visual surveys. And if the wetland meets the criteria that bog turtles are known to be using, such as vegetation and hydrology criteria, I'll be deploying traps to try to find turtles in the system. So if I'm successful in that, which I hope I am, I'll be the first populations found since the mid-1980s.
So, as Julia explains, and as it might be kind of obvious at this point, is that, this kind of research and management for the bog turtle in these wetlands is very time and personnel intensive. So, and we're cognizant of the fact that we're out there regularly walking around the wetland, and we want to make sure that whatever work we're doing isn't going to have any negative impacts on the animals. But we also, know that we need to keep track of them and make sure that the work we're doing isn't, that the management, that they're responding properly to the management, or we're not doing any harm. So, because of that, we're looking for new ways and new methods to continue to monitor the population, but with a lighter touch on the land and with maybe less boots on the ground out there. And so we were fortunate enough to secure some funding this year to replace our aging telemetry equipment. It's gotten incredible use the last couple of years with lots of years of tracking animals out there. And we are going to be deploying a set of new wildlife camera traps that is being tested in other areas. So we've been in consultation with Michael Knorr, who's been testing out this wildlife camera trapping method in North Carolina, and he had really good success in detection rates this past year. And it's not the first time being used, but it's still relatively new to this field of monitoring and research. And so in this case, you take a wildlife camera and you mount it inside a bucket, and then you cut these notches in the bucket and you flip it upside down. And so the wildlife camera is triggered when an animal passes through this tunnel under the bucket. And so you get a nice clear picture of what's passing through this. And so by placing these buckets over those rivulets, which are those little bog turtle highways, we are hoping to be able to detect animals. And so if we can, this will be really valuable because we can basically deploy 20 of these out into areas maybe adjacent to where we have occupied sites, or into places where Julia's research is saying might be really suitable to bog turtles. And we can leave these cameras there for several weeks. And these cameras might have a better chance of detecting a one-off occurrence of a bog turtle. And that's all we need is one picture of a turtle to say, hey, there's evidence, send the crew out here, go do surveys with experienced bog turtle surveyors, go deploy traps, because if there's one there, there's likely more. But just finding that one detection can be incredibly hard in new areas where you don't know where they are. Our numbers and captures are so successful because we've been working in these wetlands for 30 years, and turtles like the same spots. They like to hang out and go to the same places. And so we can kind of regularly find them. So we're really optimistic to be deploying some new technology this year and further testing out this method of wildlife camera traps for the bog turtle. And I hopefully we'll get, other observations of, cool critters that might be living out there as well. We're also going to continue to work really closely with the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife and Natural Heritage to do management here to improve the bog turtle habitat, but also just make it better for all the other rare species that are found here. So we know that prescribed fire can have direct benefits to the type of habitats that we're trying to manage. And so it's important to keep animals on radio so that we know that when we need to burn, that the animals aren't up. And so we won't burn if we see animals up and around, and we can go and check on them. So that'll continue to be an important part of our toolkit, and hopefully being deployed in the next year or so. We're also going to continue to do invasive species removal, as well as control the woody vegetation in these places. So, most people know invasive species they're coming in everywhere. Most of these sites are in pretty good condition, but we are always on the lookout to remove anything before it really gets a foothold. And then a lot of these systems are used to kind of some light level of disturbance, some intermittent, grazing or flooding or something like that. But with the current layout of the land, where you have these wetland sites that are fragmented by roads and housing and development, the animals can't move around as disturbance happens. And so if we can do controlled disturbance in targeted areas, that's going to give them the best outlook. And so we're looking to kind of explore new areas where we can open up the canopy. This has been part of Julia's research and our recent work is we found one turtle in one spot. So we opened the canopy up and now we're finding more in a new area. They could have always been there and we just didn't know, but it could also be that the habitat management is bringing them into that spot. And, lastly, I think that, it's been important for us the last year or so to tell the story of the bog turtle and this conservation effort. One, because it's important to have collaboration and share lessons learned for other organizations that are trying to do similar work. But also I think that in today's day and age, it's just important to have these positive stories where organizations and people are coming together and truly dedicated to the long haul of saving these species. This is it's really long work, hard hours, but so far I think it's really paying off. And so I think that we've been excited and happy that our stories are being shared and that people are learning about the conservation efforts of the bog turtle. I think we're all set there, Liz. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Julia and our partners again. I can't speak enough of our partners at Mass Wildlife. They are incredibly dedicated staff that are out there all the time with us. And so we really appreciate that, as well as funding, Julia's research is funded as a region-wide collaborative. So it definitely is a partner project.
Well, thank you so much. That was such a fabulous presentation. I've heard you talk many times about this, and I always learn something new. And I'm always so impressed by just your passion and dedication. And this was been such a nice opportunity to hear Julia as well, because I haven't had an opportunity to really hear your experience with the bog turtles. And it's very cool that this has been women-led for so long. I also hadn't made that connection. So just to both of you, congratulations for the amazing work and thank you. Not surprisingly, we have so many questions. So I'm just gonna jump right in if that's okay. There's some small questions that'll be quick, and then some more complicated questions. So I'm going to start with just a couple of the quick ones. Do bog turtles inhabit beaver meadows? And maybe that's a bigger question: are beavers good or bad for bog turtles? Because beavers are complicated critters, right?
Yeah, I would say it's a complicated answer. So historically, I would say bog turtles definitely would have inhabited beaver wetlands. So beavers will come into wetland complex, they'll flood things out, and they'll chew up all the woody vegetation. And when they leave, you're left with this nice open meadow that's wet, and that is good bog turtle habitat. But what happens now is that and then the beavers might not be there for 10 or 20 years. So the bog turtles could move into that area, but when the beavers come back, they need to leave and go somewhere else, otherwise it's flooded. And so now our wetlands are so fragmented and they don't have those corridors to move and escape beaver flooding. So in almost all cases that I've experienced, beavers have a negative impact because the turtles don't have anywhere to go, or they're flooding out really critical spots like nesting or overwintering, and those things cannot be recreated in other ways. They're very ingrained natural features that are part of kind of the whole way the system functions. So they can't respond as much. So historically, yes, but they don't do so well in them unless they're just using them intermittently, and it's fine that they go there for a couple of years and then that's not where they have to stay. As long as they have somewhere else to move to, I think they would be okay.
So then I'm kind of curious then, so do we have some sort of practice around beavers as we're managing, or we just let things happen that happen? Do we intervene? We
do. We have at one of our sites, we've had a lot of flooding from beavers. And so we have had water flow devices. God, we've been maintaining them for so long. There's so many memories of ripping out beaver dams and installing water flow pipes and learning way more about beavers than I ever thought I would have to manage turtles. So yeah, we do have our goals at that site has been to control the water level as much as possible with these water flow devices. We actually just had a hydrology study done and learned that it is these relic beaver dams that are making the system flood, or it's making it more susceptible to bad flooding when we get these big rain events. So we hope to actually go in and remove all of these old beaver dams. And if we can do that and burn it regularly, we will keep it in conditions that beavers don't want to come back to. And so that will be our hope, is that they can find another place to live since the turtles can't move.
Yeah, that's great. That's really interesting. So we've got this great question from Carmen Revenga. Are terrestrial turtles tortoises, or is that only British English? The turtle tortoise question is a good one.
You want to go take it, Julia?
The way I always hear it is like all tortoises are turtles, but not all turtles are tortoises. So
Wow.
I'll let Angela explain or go further in there.
That would be a great response in my mind. Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is probably a little bit nuanced, just like vernacular language, like how you call things. But tortoises are generally, much more terrestrial species, like, maybe something like a box turtle that is very linked to the land versus a bog turtle, which is a wetland species versus, other species that go between lakes and streams and uplands. So.
That's great. Mary Thomas asks, in the video, she noticed glossy buckthorn. Is that degrading the habitat, and are we managing it?
Yeah, so it is on a species that we would control. Interesting enough, there is at least 1 or 2 lookalike species of glossy buckthorn in these calcareous wetlands that we work in, and we're always checking our reference guides because they're so closely lookalike. I think it's like a cherry shrub or something else that looks very similar to glossy buckthorn. So I'll have to go out and check and make sure we didn't miss any. But yes, that would be something that we would absolutely remove if we saw it there.
And so then Debbie Gallagher asks a couple of the basic questions that others might be thinking about is, how big do bog turtles get? I know you mentioned it in the beginning, like
that's full grown.
And what's their lifespan? And then what do they eat?
Julie, you want to take those?
Yeah, so they get about 3 to 4 inches. So think about the size of your palm. They occupy that, and about the weight of a baseball, so 100 grams or so. And then lifespan, I believe the oldest recorded is 50, right, Angela?
I think it's 56. Yeah, that we know of. Yeah.
It's hard with the bog turtles because they are so cryptic. It's hard to get it, when they emerge from the egg to, their full lifespan.
Yeah. So how can you tell how old they are? Is it like a tree where you count the rings?
Yep, exactly. So
it is. I was
part
just
of the shell.
joking.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So they've got annuli, which are little rings, just like a tree, and you count those to age the turtle.
But the challenge is like, because they're so small, like you only see those defined rings until they're maybe around 10 years old. And then that's as big as they're going to get. So you can't see those rings anymore. So if you find a turtle when it's young, like in 2000, if we found a 5-year-old turtle, we could count those 5 rings. We have a very accurate age for that animal. In the 80s, when things were just starting, they could say it has 10 or 11, like it's an adult turtle, but we don't know if it's an 11-year-old or a 20 or 30-year-old. So that's why these long studies are really giving us this information about how old they can be. And I think there's one of the Nature Conservancy sites in Pennsylvania also has a very long history of research and monitoring. So I think they might have one of the older documented, or there's some zoos as well that have animals that have been in their care for a long time.
So that's
also,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add, and also because they burrow, they're constantly rubbing their shell, so that flattens and smooths out those rings too. So as they get older, not only do the rings get harder to see because it compacts on their small shells, but also they wear them down.
So that's very tricky. So our research, when we tag them, it is probably pretty helpful, because then you could track the specific turtles and get some specific answers.
Yep. Yeah. And so in terms of their diet, they have a pretty varied diet. I know for sure that they like to eat slugs and snails, because I found them with the slug slime like dripping off their face. And
I think when we found one, there was a slug right in their mouth.
Yes. Yeah. So definitely invertebrates. They're going to be opportunistic in what they can eat, but it has been something that I've cued in over the years, like kind of, looking at the invertebrate communities that are found in some of these wetlands to understand how is that the food source directly related to the quality of the habitat, or how robust the population is, because obviously they need a good, reliable, food source to persist.
Thanks. So we got a couple of questions about the range for the turtles. Someone asked whether there's something that constrains the bog turtle population to only the far west of Massachusetts, other than just the Berkshires. And then there was another question, if you bear with me, it's down below. We have a lot of questions, but I want to put them together. Have bog turtles been found in central Mass, north or south? We've lots of bogland here in the Athol area. And this is Robert Coleman. And have dedicated nature organizations any thought of introducing populations further east?
Yeah, so I think that my understanding of kind of the historic range and why turtles are in the western part of the state and not in the eastern part of the state, I think the Connecticut River Valley was probably a pretty big defining feature in terms of a natural migration for the animal, like being such a small animal. Not that they couldn't, swim across the river, but historically it was probably much less likely that they did. And so I don't know of any naturally occurring populations east of the Connecticut River. So I think that while there could be habitat that seems suitable and maybe they could persist there, none there naturally. And with when you're working with federally listed species, especially something as threatened as the bog turtle, they tend to be pretty careful on like how experimental they let the work go. And I think we're not at the point yet where we're talking about reintroducing them or adding them to new sites to see if they could do that, because we really need to focus our effort on saving them where they are right now and expanding those populations within, their wetland systems. That's probably our best chance to save the species.
That's
Anything
good.
you want to add, Julia, to that?
No, yeah, that encompasses.
We also got a question about whether or not we're coordinating with any other TNC chapters on this work. Are we the only ones working on bog turtles? For example, Carmen asked specifically about the North Carolina chapter. Are we working with them at all on bog turtles?
Not as much as I wish we were. I think that there definitely is some differences between what the southern populations are allowed to do in terms of work and research, and they can be a little bit more experimental in their activities because they're not listed to the same degree that the northern populations are. And I do have contacts specifically with the chapter in Pennsylvania that does a lot of the bog turtle work. And I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, they actually had the first ever national bog turtle conference where they brought together everybody from the northern and southern population. And that was the first time we've all met together to be able to share lessons learned and information. And it was great. And one thing I did notice was that TNC, I think, was the only organization, like nonprofit, that was present from like throughout the range of the species. But because everyone's nuanced in terms of their state agencies and regulations, we tend to partner much closely with our state, partners rather than across the board with Nature Conservancy. But I think there's definitely room for improvement when it comes to collaboration amongst that. And, just the fact that we're definitely going to be working with Michael and the North Carolina population to understand how that protocols might work up here.
That's great. There's so much we can learn from each other. Although we're all super busy actually doing the work on the ground. So lifting our heads up, takes some effort. We got a great question. Are you seeing signs of climate change impacts in the habitat? And what are you most worried about with climate change in box turtles?
Julia, you want to?
Yeah, so one of the first things that I've seen is that with radio telemetry, looking at Angela's data and Angela's knowledge from previous years when she did her master's, when they would go into the hibernacula. So this year, I believe, Angela, you stopped tracking around October, correct? Yeah, and this year for when they went into the hibernacula was in November. So that's when they're going back into their winter refuge. So it's staying warmer longer, the turtles are staying out longer. And then at the other end of that, in the spring emergence, they're emerging in earlier months than they have been in previous years. So
yeah. So I think we're seeing, anecdotally, definitely some instances of changes maybe in emergence and hibernacula entrance, like up north. I think that the biggest risks are like, say they go down into October and November and they're underground at that point and they don't intend to come out for a while, and then you get a flooding event. These big intensive flooding events are very worrisome for us because they don't have, the same ability to respond. I'd heard at a partner meeting about another site where a bog turtle site had been, inundated with underwater with 12 feet of water. And they actually had some animals on radio, and 2 of them managed to hunker down and stay and survive being, the site being flooded, and one did get washed downstream. But they were able to bring them back and get them back into their site. So I think that and like the, the new invasive plants that get brought in with climate change are probably the biggest threats that the species faces with climate change.
Yeah. There was another question about concern for the turtles. Are we worried at all about the antennas that we put on the turtles, that they might impede the bog turtles' movements into and within the hibernacula? Are they flexible enough so there are no problem? Do they get snagged on things and injure the turtles?
Yeah, so I'll answer that. So the antennas are very flexible. It's just like a thin little piece of rubberized wire. And a lot of times they actually break off, which hurts for the radio telemetry, ends up hurting my part of it because it makes it harder for their signal to go out, like your regular radio, if you have an antenna on it or not. But where they're placed on the shell has been used in turtles for many years. That placement location has, and it's been shown to not impede the turtles whatsoever. And it's far enough back when they burrow that it goes and flexes with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we will, Julia will weigh the animals before they get a radio on them to make sure that they are big enough to carry that radio. So if they're not big enough, they don't get the radio. And it is they're such small animals. We have such a small threshold with what we can put on them. And thank goodness that the technology has gotten better and the radios last longer and they are much smaller than what even I was using, 10 years ago, or what Allison Whitlock was using 20 years ago. So I think that has definitely been to our advantage. And I had evidence where I was putting radios on turtles and like a male and female with radios on started like mating while I was trying to glue radios onto them. So I felt like that was pretty clear evidence that they weren't impeding those kind of activities.
That's really funny.
Yep.
So a question also, are the turtle eggs susceptible to predation? And I remember when we went on our hunt for the turtles, up the hill, there was evidence that raccoons, I guess, had found a bunch of nests of snapping turtles, maybe, or some other kind of turtle. And are they as at risk as these other turtles?
Yeah, they're definitely vulnerable to the nest predation, just like I think all turtles are. So we haven't done much with the nest ecology in the last couple of years, but Allison Whitlock, who did the first PhD study out here and one of the most, initial comprehensive studies for the species, she did a lot of research on the nesting. And so she would find that nests would get predated by ants, by shrews, like she would cage, some of them she caged, but there was so much predation from below that it was that. But it's no more than other turtles, and it is the level of natural predation that the species is kind of adjusted to. And so I think what we're most careful about is that we know where the nesting areas are, and then they hide their eggs in these little sphagnum hummocks, and so we avoid those areas. Don't walk in those, don't step on top of the hummocks in those areas, because you never know when a nest is going to be there. So we just we try to make sure that we don't do anything to increase the nest loss. And occasionally we'll cage nests, but it hasn't really been the best strategy to, for the species. It's helpful, but it's not the best investment of our time to cage them out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you make a good point, is that this species was designed to survive despite predation, and which is why they have just so many eggs. And so with the idea that, the predator will come, but maybe not get all of them. So
right. Yeah. So the average bog turtle she'll lay 2 eggs. Some of them can 4. She doesn't have we have x-rays that their bellies are packed with eggs if they have that many in them. But what the species relies on is how Julie mentioned, that they live for a really long time, that they lay 2 eggs every year for 40 years. That's what beats the predation risk for the species. So losing one female, it can be really bad to a population because it relies so much on her living for so long.
Oh, that's very interesting. Ira Gershenhorn asks, since you're in that bog, are you doing any work for other initiatives also that may also be concerned about what's going on in the bog? Removing invasives, I suppose. Or I know when we went looking, we also saw some lovely orchids that were also endangered species or threatened. And
yeah, so our work with the bog turtle is definitely kind of an umbrella species to protect a ton of other rare plants, mostly that live in these wetlands. And so We have a long list of species that we are also on the lookout for in different times of year when we're likely to see them. There's bog birches, there's orchids, there's sedges, there's all sorts of like wildflowers that live in bog turtle habitat and will benefit from the very, similar activities. And so we have found that it's easiest if we have the lens of managing for the bog turtle, we get a lot of other species, whereas if we just manage for one of the other species, we might miss things that the bog turtle needs. And so it does mean that like we have a lot of protocols when working in the wetlands, because we're not just worried about stepping on a turtle or like not getting poison sumac, which is everywhere, but it's also all the other plants that we need to make sure that we're, not cutting down the wrong thing.
Yeah, it makes good sense. Paul Fusco asks an interesting question. Are there any indications of bog turtles in Native American culture or lore?
It's not something I've done research into. I imagine probably to some degree. And I mean, I know that like the pollen cores that we did in the 90s showed that like a significant char layer was present every 100 or so years. And so the thought is that Native Americans were maybe burning these wetlands to keep them open for foraging and hunting grounds. That would seem like a plausible explanation, but I don't know, Julia, if you've run into any interesting stuff in your research.
No, I actually haven't, but that's a great point to look into. Sure.
That's great. And then Justin Kornoyer asks a really interesting question too. Have you used machine learning to find new areas with high probability for suitable habitat? It's been used for freshwater mussels successfully in some places. Really cool thinking.
Yeah, so my basis of trying to find new sites is actually based on a lab mate in my master's program who used it for freshwater mussels. So I'm going to be using GIS layers and narrowing it down from species distribution models and looking at hydrology and vegetation classifications and narrowing down sites to try to find new areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing I was interested that I've heard from Michael is so when you deploy these wildlife camera traps that like take the pictures of the bog turtles, like he gets really clear pictures, and some of them have unique enough like neck patches or shell designs that you could maybe identify them down to an individual level, which would be incredible. That would kind of change the way that we would monitor the populations, but it's very time intensive, obviously, for a person to look through hundreds of photographs. And so it's definitely occurred to me like there's got to, other things like our fish monitoring system where, the fishermen are using cameras to measure like automated measuring fish and identifying species. Like how could those programs maybe be adapted to this remote sensing of bog turtle pictures that would allow us to actually get individual and population metric data from these wildlife cameras rather than just like a turtle is there, but what turtle is it and how often have we seen it and what time of day type information would be great to use machine learning and algorithms and stuff like that to do that rather than a poor intern probably sifting through lots of photos or volunteers.
The intern.
Yeah.
The intern, our big data analytics is the intern.
Yeah.
Tom Balestero says, is there any guidance for turtle road crossings? Do these turtles cross roads?
Luckily, the bog turtle does not have to, that they want to stay in the wetland. They nest in the wetland. So most other species have to leave to find dry ground to nest in. So, I mean, I haven't been too involved with like some of the other species that do, but I know that there has been success in designing culverts. And I know I think it's down in, might be partners in Delaware or New Jersey that do have bog turtle sites that maybe have a road going through them. And so they are creating culverts to prevent that mortality where the animals, the road is in the way of maybe their summer and winter grounds. At our sites, that's not a problem. But there is a lot of good research about turtles using properly designed culverts. And I'm sure that like the culverts that, we're trying to suggest and promote for other wildlife passage would be suitable for, bog turtles or other turtle species.
Yeah, so think about that infrastructure, all those infrastructure dollars coming to states that are being used for wildlife crossings, and it can help with this as well, it sounds like. That's great. Let's see, Elaine Richardson asks, do bog turtles share habitat with other wetland turtles? And how many kinds of wetland turtles are there in Massachusetts?
So I can speak on other wetland turtles that I've, as Angela showed the picture of the hibernaculus, sometimes you reach your hand in and pull out whatever you find. And sometimes you pull out other turtles. So I found, we usually find a lot of spotted turtles. So spotted turtles use the same type of habitat. Painted turtles and snapping turtles all use the same areas.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of our sites we have often found wood turtles have been found using, they tend to be more river and forested corridor type, but they'll use like riparian systems too. So I'm going to blank on an exact number of species that we have in Massachusetts, but yeah, wood turtles, spotted, painted, snapping. I have great, photos of the snapping turtles that like to go into some of the streams that separate the two wetlands and, hunker down in the stream bank over the winter time and stuff like that. I found juvenile snappers with the bog turtles, but never any full grown ones.
That's great. Marian Orlowski says, thank you for sharing this work. My organization is trying to begin similar work, and I'd love to be in touch. Curious what the acreage of the two habitat sites are.
Yeah. Hi, Marian. Nice to hear from you. Yeah. So one of the sites is like an immediate 300 acre wetland complex, part of like a 3,000 acre protected area. So it's a big protected, it's a kind of a small occupied area and a big wetland. And the other one is a smaller. Do you remember the acreage numbers, Julia?
Not offhand, I'm thinking 65, but that might be, yeah.
60, I would say between 40 and 60 acres of like the wetland, and then they tend to occupy a smaller area, concentrated pockets of really highly suitable habitat, but they'll move throughout.
We got a really a lengthier question from Jamie Baker. And Jamie, if you're listening, why don't you send it offline? You'll get information so you can contact Angela directly. Jamie's a current AmeriCorps Cape Cod member. And the question I thought was interesting is, how are we using genetics to monitor the population and identify transients and isolated populations?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to take a first stab on that? I don't know if you're a little bit more current on some of the more recent research.
The only genetics research I'm familiar with is looking at the differences between the northern and southern populations, but not looking at within populations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what I've been familiar with in terms of the more recent research is that what some of the data is showing from genetics is that a lot of these animals have lived in isolation for a very, very long time, and that they're kind of suited to these small isolated pockets of, so the risk of inbreeding that you might think would be more prominent with other species doesn't seem to impact bog turtles the same way, because they've always kind of lived in small isolated populations and had maybe every once in a while you have a turtle that leaves and goes to find a new wetland and does that genetic diversity, mixing, but they're pretty tolerant to being isolated. And so I think that the animals at our sites have been part of some of the genetic studies, and there's a lot of data out there waiting for probably a PhD student who really wants to take it to the next level and understand the population genetics a little bit better of the animal. That would help us understand different distribution models and how and what concerns we might need to have, into the future for the species.
That's great. Hawk Matheny says, very informative webinar. Thank you. After your field research in 2022 and 23, and if you discover new populations in previously undocumented locations, can you do a follow-up webinar? Full respect, not disclosing the location, but he really wants to know whether the camera in a bucket method is effective.
Yes, I will be very happy to share that. I'm, excited to try something new besides just the telemetry method. And I'm really optimistic. I have a feeling we're going to get something. These sites are just really cool, and that I think I'm feeling really optimistic about it.
So our own Karen Lombard, who's the head of our stewardship team, says that you might be able to use genetic analysis of the water to determine if bog turtles are present. That's definitely a newer area.
Yeah, I've actually pitched that idea, and there's a lot of conflicting information about that because where the turtles are present is such murky water and have such mud contaminants in it that it's hard to pull out the DNA. So it would
Yeah.
be amazing if that could work, but it's still being tweaked.
Yeah, there's definitely been some work on what's called the environmental DNA model of testing for detection of bog turtles. And so there's already some primers built that, you know, researchers can use to basically look for genetic markers in the water. But like, as Julia said, like the conditions just cause for a lot of contamination, a lot of other stuff. It's really hard to find to sample in a cost-effective way that you're going to get that detection. You need so many soil samples and water samples to get it. So Michael Knorr actually compared the camera traps to the environmental DNA. That was part of like his like let's find new ways to find bog turtles. And so I think he had a little bit less success. You know, there's places they would sample for environmental DNA at known bog turtle sites and not always get a hit. So
yeah,
you know, and as well as dogs, like there's been some places that they've been training canine dogs to sniff them out, but that's a training time and intensive for handlers to move them through a wetland for detection as well. But it's also another promising outlook. If I could only train my dog to sniff out turtles, we'd be all set.
It'd be all set.
I know it's a dream of mine.
But there's other training challenges before that, right?
Right. Yes. You know, training some solid seasonals and inters is probably a better return on investment there.
That's great. Well, listen, we're heading towards the end of our time today. I want to note that there's a bunch of messages in the chat, including different folks who've said, hey, I'd love more information on this or that. And we'll keep a record of it. And I just want to thank you, Angela and Julia, so much for today. You're just so dynamic as presenters, and it's such interesting work of the Nature Conservancy. Any final last thought, Angela, before we sign off?
Yeah, you know, I think I just want to say thank you to, you know, people who may have on the presentation that have been part of the Nature Conservancy and supporting this project and this research. It is like, it takes a long-term investment, and it's because of supporters like you that have made this work. And so I'm really appreciative of that, as well as all our partners that contribute to it. And I'm so excited to have Julia on and to see this project through its next phase.
That's great. And really, you know, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, signing on, and I want to thank you for your support of the Nature Conservancy. It's your support that makes all of this work possible. We've got some very dedicated donors to this work and to all of the work of the chapter, and so just a personal thank you for that. We're going to be sending everyone on this webinar a follow-up email over the coming days, and it's going to have links to the resources we've talked about today and a recording of this webinar. And so if you know somebody you think who would have enjoyed being here but couldn't make it, feel free to forward it to them, the video. You can follow TNC in Massachusetts on social media at conserve_MA, both on Facebook and Instagram. And that's a good way to keep up with our work and to get updates on virtual opportunities to connect with us. I want to also invite you to join us next Thursday at noon for a conversation with Jen Benson, the president of the Alliance for Business Leadership. And as always, you can see our upcoming webinars and sign up at nature.org/MA webinars. And I just want to thank you two again for presenting, and I want to thank everyone out there for joining us. I hope you have a great afternoon.